Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining. We're here with Dr. Phyllis Bivens-Hudson and Ms. Shana Pyatt. Phyllis is a 30-year education veteran who has served in various teaching and leadership positions in New Jersey. She is also a founding instructor for the Rutgers Alternate Route Teacher Training Program at Center for Effective School Practices. Shana is the Science Department Chair and former high school principal for North Star Academy, one of New Jersey's highest performing schools. Shana presents annually at our conference on the topic of science literacy skills. Phyllis and Shana, take it away.
Yeah. Thank you. Hi, Shana. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Phyllis?
Good. I'm good. So let's just get started because I know everyone out there who listening will be anxious to hear this. So have you always taught science using this interdisciplinary method of infusing literacy with your content area?
Actually, I did to a smaller degree, and I think it's partly because my undergraduate degree was in English and secondary education. I originally wanted to be a marine biology major, but allowed my fear of physics to sort of push me towards my second love, which was writing.
Mm-hmm.
And for my master's degree, I got a master's in multicultural education, and my project was actually around developing an integrated science and English curriculum. So I feel it as if it's always been a part of how I taught and how I had my students writing short stories and explanatory papers and, of course, lab reports, even when I became a science teacher eventually.
Right. And I'm glad to hear you say that you have that kind of background because I actually feel that all teachers should have that English background as a part of what they do so that they're not so intimidated by literacy.
Absolutely.
Yes. And so why did you feel it was important to establish this particular focus for your session?
I think it's pretty much for the same reasons that you just mentioned, that all too often students see literacy skills like reading, comprehension, analysis, writing, and speaking as a skill that should be mastered in English or language arts classes only. And they forget that everything we learn in science is proven through the language of math mostly, but communicated and supported through our ability to clearly write in journals, to clearly explain our findings and the value of our research through oral and other written means of communication. So it's actually those literacy skills that help us learn about each other's work as scientists, allow us to critique it, challenge it, support it, and then find new work to do. So I think that it's critical that we ensure that our teachers, all of them, establish a sort of particular focus on literacy skills in our science classes, and I would agree that it should extend to all subjects.
Wow, you said a mouthful there, and certainly an important mouthful. I almost wanted to feel like I want to just kind of encapsulate that into some kind of bumper sticker because that's important what you just said there.
Absolutely.
And so we know that candidates indicated that your topic is applicable to any subject area. So why do you think so many content area teachers struggle to understand the connections between their disciplines and literacy skills like reading and writing?
Yeah, I think this happens simply because that is not the framework from which we tend to have learned and operated from on a normal basis in our history of education. And that it's really a shift in our approach, and that shift is going to require time that needs to be built into the framework from the start. So many of us learned but did not master many math skills using sort of the drill and kill method. Many of us learned but did not master content vocabulary in various science classes or even history classes by rote memorization. The key is that we need to shift how we think about instruction and how we think about infusing some of these skills within our students. And until we as the educators do that, we're not going to see that shift. And there's just a need for us to remember that skills take time to develop and that they need to be practiced. And if we want to develop any skill within our content areas, we need to ensure that students practice them and not just simply do this sort of cursory exposure to it. And I think that's what we have traditionally done in the past, and we just need to start to shift that framework and that lens through which we see that.
Yeah, I agree. That shift in our approach is just what will take us to the next level. Of each of the ideas you shared with the candidates, which two can you be most easily implemented for new content area teachers?
Sure. So I think this is really challenging to think about, because I think that all of them are absolutely necessary. I really focus on three areas, primarily the vocabulary, learning to access information from textbooks, and then finally reading and analyzing data and graphs. I think are extremely critical. But I think two that I think could be implemented for new content area teachers are really vocabulary development and the use of textbooks, using note-taking strategies. I think within all of our content areas, there are a plethora of vocabulary that students need to learn in order to effectively communicate their understanding and in order to appropriately evaluate those ideas and responses with peers and others. And so my suggestion of every teacher dedicating time to purposefully identify the key bottom line vocabulary that will make sure every student masters by the end of the unit, coupled with the teacher carefully and purposefully planning time to ensure that students use the vocabulary and engage in discussion around that, ensure that students master true learning of concepts. And I think that's one key piece. And then the other idea is around teaching students how to access information from various texts, like textbooks, research journals, and political cartoons. Like, these are skills that students need to learn and then practice and then master before going to college, where they're going to be required to access information from very dense texts and pretty much teach themselves a lot of content, or at least familiarize themselves with the material before attending a college lecture. And so if students can learn those particular skills prior to college, I know that they'll increase their success there.
That's some really, really rich information that you've provided there, and I'm really glad to hear you speak about vocabulary development in particular, because so often teachers end up doing these kinds of things in isolation, and they don't really help our children a lot. So do you ever get students pushing back against the expectation for the use of literacy skills in their science assignments?
So sometimes. I mean, what's key is about the expectation from the very beginning. And so maybe initially students are confused, again, about bridging that gap between what happens in English class and realizing that it can happen in science class. But if the expectation is established early on, students are going to rise to that level or not. So having clear systems in place that ensure that you communicate what you expect, providing students with exemplars, and then evaluating and assessing with that expectation driving your work, students will have little room to push back. And when they see how it leads to their success and better understanding, there's little to no argument there. Also, students like to talk. And so why not give them structured opportunities to engage in conversations around what you want them to discuss, around the vocabulary, around the content.
Absolutely. And when we're doing these things, we're actually, they don't recognize it, but we're actually stretching them. And that's what we need to be doing in every instance, is stretching them. And so I have one final question, and that question is there a community of science literacy advocates and experts that teachers can connect with to kind of keep their toolkit stocked?
Yeah, so it's interesting because finding an actual space where many teachers are doing this is challenging. But what I have found is joining some of the listservs and message boards for AP classes is where you tend to find a community of teachers who are trying to stretch students' understanding in a way that leads to a lot of literacy assignments being created. And they tend to share a lot of that information. And that I have found to be extremely helpful, because I've seen that there's even been a change, a shift in the direction in which a lot of the College Board 8 has been designing the AP exams, where there is this sort of space for especially the part 2s of biology, chemistry, physics, of these exams, to rely more on integrating understanding from a variety of concepts, but then forcing students to explain, to evaluate, to make projections based off data and clearly communicate that. And so that has shifted then many of the assignments that the teachers have needed to create for students. And so I'm finding that those communities have been very helpful in providing resources around infusing more literacy. Another thing is a book that I read many years ago, and I can't actually remember the author. It was called Bringing Words to Life. And it was a real game changer in how I thought about teaching vocabulary and the importance of expanding vocabulary instruction within my class. The last thing I would say is that many of the newer science textbooks that are being used in schools really do understand this sort of important connection and purposeful addition of literacy connections for teachers, and you can find them within the chapter resources for many of the textbooks. And I would encourage teachers to just reach out to publishers, because they will provide you with free versions of their text if it's something that you're considering or may be interested in purchasing for your school. They will send you free volumes and free copies of textbooks for you to look through, and you can see that there's quite a few literacy-driven projects and activities in there for teachers to use.
For those out there listening, would that book by any chance be by Isabel Beck and Linda Kukan? Okay, yes. So that's the author. There's your author.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. You're welcome. Well, we thank you so much for this. This was such a rich conversation and very informative, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again next year at our conference when we celebrate 10 years.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's on my calendar already.
Okay, great. So thank you both. Thank you very much, Phyllis and Shana, for
You're welcome.
the important conversation. And I'm sure that anyone who listens to this podcast will understand the importance of advancing literacy skills in all subject areas, and will use the ideas Shana shared to advance their literacy integration efforts as well. So thanks again, and have a terrific day.
Thank you. You as well.